the Christmas Eve shift. It was my second year with the force, and me and my partner, Mendel, had drawn the short straw. We were both working Christmas Eve. As patrol officers, we'd be driving around doing our usual routine, only on the night that most people would rather be doing anything but working. The scene is still vividly burned into my mind. We were in our cruiser slowly driving down a quiet road a little past midnight whilst keeping an eye out and an ear to the radio for any car wrecks, drunks, or some other kind of incident that required our attention. To nobody's surprise though, in a smaller, semi-rural town on Christmas Eve, there wasn't a soul outside except for us. I was sitting in the passenger seat watching the snow flurries fall out the side window and musing about the few hours of sleep I'd be lucky to get once home before my kids inevitably woke up early and excited to go tearing through the presents Santa had left under the tree for them. When the call came in. "This is dispatch, we have a potential home invasion in progress, requesting officers to the scene immediately." "Copy that," Mendel spoke into the radio. "Address." As dispatch delivered our location, I felt a small lump form in my stomach and my heart skipped a beat as I looked over in Mendel's direction. He obviously was thinking the same thing as I, as he mirrors my actions before turning back to the road, flicking on the car beacons, and increasing our speed. The address of the home was one we were both familiar with. 3 days prior we had been called to the same house. The owner, a single mother, around early 30s I guessed, with 2 young kids, had called 911 saying she thought there was someone outside her house. When we arrived at the scene, she had timidly opened the door for us and we took a look around the property. According to her, she was preparing to take the trash out when she saw something moving outside the kitchen window, after which she promptly ran upstairs and locked herself and the kids in the bathroom before calling the police. She couldn't provide us with much of a description, only that she briefly saw a shadowy figure before she had bolted. We checked the area around the window but found nothing. It had snowed earlier that day, so a fresh blanket covered the lawn and would have revealed clear footprints had someone been there, but the snow around the window was undisturbed. We checked the rest of the area around the house, but came up with nothing there either. The woman, Beth as she told us, was very clearly terrified by the ordeal, but there wasn't much we could do. She was very adamant about having seen what she saw, and repeatedly emphasized that she wasn't crazy. While I'm not sure Mendel or I were convinced anything had actually been there, after all there was no physical evidence and the human brain isn't immune to tricking itself, I did sympathize with her. Having kids myself, I know how powerful the drive to protect them is, and the thought of not being able to do so is any parent's worst nightmare. As we stood there in the house's entrance hall, Beth was still trembling and her 2 kids, the older looked no more than 6, looking down from the staircase banister. I had asked her if she had anywhere else she and the kids could go for the night just as a safety precaution. She responded in the negative, saying a hotel would have been too expensive, and the only family they had lived in another state. After that we told her to call if anything else happened and left. I could sense both Mendel and I were a bit weirded out by the situation, but neither of us spoke about it in the days since. That was until now, as we found ourselves called back to the same location days later. Pulling up in front of the innocuous 2-story home, we both exited the car quickly. Something was immediately different about the place. It looked the same as it had days ago, the same plastic Santa in the yard, the multicolored Christmas lights strung along the porch, but something was off. I could feel it, even if I couldn't quite place what it was. I placed a few heavy knocks on the door and announced our presence. No response. I knocked again. No response. Mendel took a few steps over and peered through the window into the dark house before quickly turning around in surprise. I had initially thought he had seen something inside, but followed his gaze to the porch railing, where the lights that had been providing what little illumination they could, had now gone dark. They went out as soon as I looked inside. He said, sounding a bit confused. I wasn't sure if he was talking to himself or to me, but I began answering anyway. They could just be on a timer or dash. I was cut off mid-sentence by a loud thud from inside the house. We both gave each other a quick glance to make sure we were on the same wavelength before drawing our weapons. Police. We're coming in. I yelled before grabbing the doorknob. I had expected it to be locked, had expected us to have to force our way inside, but to my surprise and unease, the door provided no resistance in opening itself. The entrance hall was dead silent. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it around looking for whatever had caused the noise we heard, but nothing was out of place. Mendel nodded his head towards the stairs, and I nodded back, understanding. He'd check upstairs while I took the ground floor. Ducking into the dining room on the left as I heard Mendel's footsteps ascending up, I began a methodical room-by-room sweep of the first floor. To say I was on edge was an understatement. I still couldn't pinpoint what it was, but something was very off in that house. Every corner I turned, every crevice I turned my light towards, I had expected to find something, only to be met with nothing every time. Everything looked to be where it should be, no signs of robbery or a struggle, no signs of any life at all. I slowly made my way into the living room, the final unchecked room, and began taking in my surroundings. A Christmas tree, a fake one by the looks of it, stood in the corner of the room by a magnificent fireplace. Though my flashlight revealed strings of lights decorated around it, they remained dark like the rest of the house. A few colorful wrapped presents sat underneath in a pile, practically begging to be torn open, while on the living room table I spotted a glass of milk and an undisturbed plate of cookies next to a note reading, "For Santa." Despite how cheerful the sight should have been, in the context of the dark, quiet house, illuminated only by flashlight, the scene filled me with an inexplicable sadness. Something clearly wasn't right here, and the thought of whatever it was happening on Christmas of all days was upsetting to me. I was tensely scanning my flashlight along bookshelves, looking at family photos and an old radio when the sound of my walkie-talkie going off nearly made me pull the trigger of the gun that was tightly gripped in my other hand. I set the flashlight down on the shelf and grabbed the walkie. "Yeah." I spoke, my voice unexpectedly shaky. "I found the kids, they're safe," Mendel replied. A bit of relief washed over me before he continued, "No sign of the mom though. They say she went downstairs and never came back. She's not down here. I've checked every room. Maybe she left. The door was unlocked when we got here." I wasn't sure how to respond. With how shaken Beth had been a few days ago, it didn't make sense to me that she would run and leave her kids behind. There had also been that thud. As my thoughts trailed off, all hell broke loose. All the lights in the living room, both the overhead and those on the tree, turned on and began flickering at a rapid pace. I frantically looked over at the switch only to see it in the off position. My eyes turned to the adjacent rooms only to see that they were all experiencing the same phenomenon. Suddenly the bookshelf radio roared to life, blasting Christmas carols at a volume that made my ears hurt. "What the hell is going on?" Mendel yelled through the radio, though I ignored him. With the rapid light flickering, I spotted something I hadn't before, something that made the knot in my stomach contract tighter. In the fireplace a few unburnt logs lay resting, and on those logs I could see a few bright red spots. Amidst the sensory overload happening all around, I grabbed my flashlight and began making my way to the fireplace on shaking legs. Crouching down, I shone my light directly into the fireplace. My initial thought had been right. Pulled around the logs, and spotting them with little dots, was the unmistakable sight of fresh ruby red blood. A fresh drop splashed down, sliding down the log and joining the forming puddle. Then another. I couldn't hear my heartbeat over the music, but I could certainly feel it. I didn't want to do it, but I had to. Reluctantly I crawled forward, shined my light up the chimney, and angled my head to look. I wish I hadn't. Stuffed halfway up the chimney, body crushed and mangled to fit in the entirely too small space, was a human. I stared directly into the dead eyes of Beth, her face contorted into an eternal, silent scream as she stared down back at me, blood dripping down her face. I lurched backwards in terror as a new nightmare began. Even louder than the still playing Christmas music from the radio, a rapid heavy stomping sound began permeating throughout the house. Only it didn't sound like it was coming from inside the house, but rather outside on the roof. Gun in one hand, flashlight in the other, I darted for the door at a speed I don't think I've ever moved before. Still disoriented from the lights and sounds, and Beth's face engraved into my mind, I stumbled out into the yard and turned my gaze to the roof. Whatever was making the pounding had ceased now, and I quickly scanned my light to find the source. I stopped when I found it. Standing upright next to the chimney was a slender, lanky figure. It was completely dark, and would have been impossible to see had my light not been fixed on it. My brain wasn't fully comprehending what I was looking at, but my eyes weren't lying to me. Whatever it was a crude mockery of a human. Limbs elongated and stretched beyond reasonable proportion, a head that sat loosely to the side as though it had a broken neck, and skin as dark as a void. It looked like a twisted, broken shadow came to life. Although it had no eyes, or any facial features at all for that matter, I could tell its attention was directed at me. Both light and gun fixed on the thing, we both stood completely still. The house lights flickering madly, music still audible from the living room, the snow falling around us, yet neither of us dared move. My concentration on the thing was broken only when I heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot, though not from mine. I turned around quickly to see backup had arrived. One of the officers was still exiting the car while the other was already in position, gun aimed at the roof. As quick as I looked back, I whipped my head forwards towards the rooftop. The thing had hunched over and appeared agitated now, though it seems the shot had missed it. I slowly raised my hand up to signal to the others not to fire again, but before the gesture was completed the creature silently flung itself backwards off the roof. Not wanting to lose it, and my brain working on autopilot at this point, I made a mad dash for the backyard. Part of me expected to find the thing injured from the fall, or perhaps ready to jump me if it wasn't hurt, but as the backyard came into view there was nothing. I frantically shined my light around, but there was nothing in the backyard. The snow all around was undisturbed. It was like whatever it was had completely vanished. The officer who fired the shot, Huey, had caught up to me in the backyard. He took a look around, shining his own flashlight as his face contorted in confusion. Where did it go? I didn't have an answer for him. After everything was done, we searched the entire property up and down several times over. We searched nearby properties. Nothing. There was no trace of that creature anywhere. According to the two kids, their mom said she had heard noises outside the house, so she woke them up, hid themselves all in the bathroom and called the police. After that there was what sounded like a knock at the door, so she went downstairs and never came back. Because she told them not to leave, they stayed there until Mendel found them. Mendel and I gave our testimony on everything that happened in the house. I hesitantly described what I had seen on the roof, and was a bit relieved that the other two officers backed me up on it so I didn't seem like I lost my mind. Something had been there, but I, nor anyone else, had any explanation for what happened or what it was. Beth's case remained open for a bit, but with nothing to work with it quickly died off. The official report only said that her body had been crushed, resulting in her death. It's been about a year since then, and I find myself constantly thinking back to that night. As much as I've tried to forget, I always find those memories creeping in. The blaring Christmas music. Beth's mangled face. The thing on the roof. I've replayed the events over and over in my mind while awake, and even more times while sleeping. I had talked about it a bit with the others, especially Mendel, but none of us could make any sense of it. More than anything I just want answers, but deep down I know there are none to be had. The real story of what happened that night will never be fully understood. At the very least, I asked not to work Christmas this year,